Okay. Welcome to Real Estate Investor Radio, and I'm here with Justin Clarke. Many of you know Justin. He was with Private Property, the founder of Private Property, online property portal here in South Africa. He's now the Chief Operating Officer of Orbvest. And Orbvest does international investments. They've got a digital platform where you can invest. And so first of all, I just want to welcome you, Justin. It's wonderful having you on the show.
Thanks, Neil. It's been a long time, I must say, since I've been on Real Estate Radio. But good to be back and just hi to all your listeners.
Wonderful. So, Justin, just tell us a little bit about the background of Orbvest. I mean, you've come onto the investment landscape, certainly for offshore investments. Tell us really where it all started, because I think you're making big inroads, certainly if we look at medical buildings in the United States. Just tell us where it all began.
Yeah, well, I'll start off with my story, Neil, seeing as it's so relevant. When I exited Private Property 3 years ago, we had been investing in and developing internet classifieds businesses across Africa, real estate, and developed an enormous amount of IP in the sort of classified space. So I thought that I would try my hand at angel investing, and I must say I made a good few investments, many of them not so good. But I did become involved with a group of guys, and I'll tell you a little bit about our founder. Henny Bezuidenhout is probably one of the biggest private owners of medical real estate in South Africa.
Right.
He's very much below the radar, but in his efforts to sort of diversify and move offshore, as a lot of South Africans have done over the last 10 years, he started looking at various countries. He had some successful developments happen in Australia. And then he started looking at the USA. And what he realized was that the USA and South Africa have very similar healthcare environments. Both are very private sector driven. And realized that what he was doing in South Africa, he could actually transfer that IP to the US. So about 6 years ago, he and a bunch of other guys started to make their first investments. They started to buy these medical buildings. And interestingly, those first two, Medical 1 and 2, we've recently just exited because we invest in a 5-year period. And those investors, if you take into consideration the Rand devaluation over the last 5 years, they would have made in excess of 200% on their money.
Wow.
That's just an indication of what the history is of Orbvest.
Absolutely.
But yeah, so subsequently, I think it's grown to quite a big organization. We have in excess of $308 million of real estate in the USA, predominantly in the fast-growing states of Georgia and Texas, but as well as New Jersey, and we've got a couple of others that we're going to be doing this year. I think the big thing is that medical real estate is super resilient to any sort of threat, and I guess this is the ultimate test with this pandemic.
Yes. Yeah, because I was going to ask about that, Justin. I mean, we are in lockdown right now. I mean, we almost heading for month 3 now. I mean, how has that affected Orbvest and by this whole coronavirus? You want to maybe just share some of them?
Yeah, I guess none of us really anticipated, sort of the damage that this thing has done to the whole world economy. But we watched with great interest and monitored all of our tenants throughout America. And in April, we managed to get the payment of 95.3% of all of our rentals. So I think we can say that we were enormously successful in completely dodging the bullet. We do think it'll get a little bit worse in May, and then it'll start to recover. Obviously, our big states, Texas and Georgia, have now opened up, so it's getting back to business. So I think that our hypothesis is being tested to the maximum, and I think we can now say that medical is completely resilient to recession. Just also bear in mind that we have a very strange situation, Neil. We have some of our medical tenants, they have leases of like 18 years, so very long.
Wow.
So another thing that.
Yeah, and are they considered an essential service in America as well? Is that why you've been so successful with your rental collection?
Yeah, so we have
compared to the others, of course, compared to the rest of the market. Because, I mean, I think I'm just trying to set the scene. In South Africa, it's north of 50% defaults in the commercial sector. I mean, and I would put, medical in a commercial as investment. I mean, you must correct me if I'm wrong. But certainly, we look at the high default rate or the high arrear rate as a result of COVID-19 in South Africa and also in America, for that matter, with a number of REITs. So is that because of the essential service of medical, or is there other reasons?
Yeah, I think it's mostly to do with the essential service. But, we certainly had some of our tenants, like dentists, for example, that were shut down. I mean, no one wants to go to a dentist in any event at the moment. It's just too close. But I think that on the other side, we've had tenants that, for example, are doing all the COVID testing for the state of Georgia. So some of them have been exceptionally busy. And another interesting anecdote is that a lot of the patients don't want to go into hospital for their elective surgery because of the threat of picking up the disease. So they prefer to go to the nearby office environment where the actual practitioner can do it in a surgery center outside of a hospital. So that has in fact made some of our establishments much busier. So it's fascinating, the dynamic. But I think there's one other thing that we also need to just pay attention to, and that is that in the US, the real estate sector generally has managed to also dodge the bullet a bit because of the huge amount of intervention by the US government, the federal government.
Right. Okay. Well, we wish that same intervention happened here in South Africa. But let's get back to Orbvest. How do you differentiate yourself from the rest of the other real estate funds and the other REITs?
Yeah, Neil, that's a great question. So I think just bear in mind that when Henny first started looking at these type of investments, he realized that what South Africans especially are looking for is bricks and mortar. They want to see the building. They want to know that they own a piece of that building. They want to see the tenant role. And so effectively, that was the initial idea. It was sort of I hate to use this word, but it was sort of a securitization of that asset. Right. And ultimately, that's still the way that we operate. So we take a building, we buy the building, we put it into a listed entity on its own. So it's completely ring-fenced from everything else. And then investors buy a share in that building. Right. Everything is completely transparent. You can go to the building, you can check out the tenants, you can check out the rent roll. So if we take a REIT or a fund that is a group of buildings all sitting together within one particular company, you don't necessarily see exactly what's going on inside of the fund. You don't see what properties are in that bundle. And you are completely subject to movements within the sentiment of the stock exchange. So if prices move up and down because of the sentiment of the exchange, I mean, let's face it, look at the REITs in South Africa today. They're trading at a fraction of their asset value.
Absolutely.
It doesn't make any sense, but of course that's the sentiment of the market.
Absolutely.
So these things do not trade. They're a 5-year investment, and you basically put your money in, you get a cash and cash return. At the end of the period, we sell the asset, we take the capital gain, and we split that with the investors.
Right. So 5 years is the kind of period, lock-in period, if we could call it that.
Absolutely.
Great. So just tell us a little bit about the buildings that you have, the Orbvest buildings, because it seems that obviously, are you only in the healthcare sector, or what other typical buildings would you look to purchase?
Yeah, Neil, I think that the first thing is focus. If you really want to go and be a winner in the US, you can't be a winner generally. You've got to be hyper-focused on a particular niche. Because of Henny's IP, we did focus on medical, and it has subsequently become a very popular commercial building asset class in the US. A lot of people chasing it for the same reasons that we started to do so. We have built up a really good reputation in the US in medical. And the other thing that's really interesting is people talk about this $1 trillion medical real estate sector in the US, but in fact, it's made up of all sorts of different components. There's hospitals, which are very much owned by big operators. There is the little office blocks that are generally a a whole group of tenants. For example, your doctor, your dentist, your pharmacy, one or two specialists, maybe a little surgery center. And those are the things that we kind of have invested in up till now. Because they're resilient, because the tenants work in a symbiotic relationship. You know, they're all, if your one specialist leaves, another one will come, because the general practitioners are feeding their work into that particular specialist. So that's how the little symbiosis works. So we love that symbiosis. And then the other thing that I think is quite interesting is that there are other sectors that stretch all the way through to, for example, senior living. Right. Something that we get out of. So we focus very much in a core sector of medical, not just in everything.
Okay. So now maybe just share a little bit about what are those in terms of the portfolio that you have. Maybe just tell us, you know, how many buildings have you purchased to date, and what kind of returns are investors getting?
So we're on building number 27 at the moment, and we have 19 at the moment under management, because we've sold off the balance. So 19 buildings we sit on at the moment, about $308 million in value, and we just launched this medical 27, which is obviously quite an interesting sector, very resilient subsector. So I think most of them are, as I say, medical office buildings. I think the biggest one is 2 towers in Georgia that are in excess of $100 million in value on their own. So it's a big chunk of our portfolio. But otherwise, just as I say, a spread of multi-tenanted office buildings. Our average cash on cash payout up till now has been 8%. That means 2% per quarter, roughly 2% per quarter.
In US dollar, of course.
In US dollars.
Yes.
So the swing of the exchange rate. And then bear in mind that at the end of the 5-year period, we exit the building, we sell it on to a REIT or fund or whoever is interested at the highest possible price. We take the capital gain, and then we share that out, as I said earlier on.
Okay. So you mentioned you were in 3 states. I think you said Texas, Georgia, and then New Jersey. Are you looking at perhaps at other states, or there's obviously a sound reason why you've selected those 3 states?
True. So the investment committee, and we have an independent investment committee that makes all the decisions ultimately. And I think that the first priority is to choose states or cities that have very diverse economies. We don't rely on single feed economies, for example, things that are fed, for example, by oil. And the other thing is population growth. We look for population growth and GDP growth. So those are 3 criteria that have minimum parameters. On the basis of that, we have also identified 3 other states, Arizona obviously being one of them, North Carolina and Florida are 3 of the bigger ones. And we will be expanding into those states during the new year. But obviously a lot of due diligence has to happen before we do anything, before we move into any city. Our investment committee is super conservative, and they like to move very slowly.
Great. Okay, so tell us a little bit about, Henny Bezuidenhout being very successful in South Africa. You mentioned earlier on in the local, medical environment of an office environment. And obviously, somehow it seems that he's managed to get some great success, just through, how did this all come about?
Yeah, as I said, I think that it's remarkable how similar the South African environment was to the US environment. We were just like a little mini-me of the US. And I think that the initial observations and learnings that he had from South Africa, he was able to replicate over there. And that's really been our foundation. Mm-hmm. Obviously, we've learned a hell of a lot more because, the market is so much bigger and so much more interesting over there. So it has developed, but he goes over, on a regular basis, spends time there. He goes to Singularity University, various conferences that they have on disruptive medicine, etc. Right. So it's very important that we stay ahead of demand. Yes. As you know, it's most important in the commercial real estate sector to buy buildings that are worth more in the future than you pay for them today.
Right. So maybe just go a little bit back to the coronavirus, because it's obviously on top of mind of everybody right now, especially because people are still in lockdown here in South Africa. Particularly, we know that some obviously international markets, they're sort of easing restrictions, and as a result now, I mean, people are looking, a lot of funds here, specifically in South Africa, being decimated. I mean, so are your returns, I mean, how is that been impacted in other way? We did touch on it. And earlier on, in terms of your very good collections of that kind of stuff, will there be a rollover effect on the returns for investors?
So, Neil, the first thing is we believe not. We have just paid out our record dividends now in the middle of Corona. In fact, it was 2 weeks ago.
Right.
We're in excess of $1 million every quarter now, and growing quite fast. So there was no impact. We paid dividends, or not no. We paid on every medical building across the portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
And as I said, there were, I think, 21 tenants that had a problem.
Mm-hmm.
We have negotiated with those tenants, and all of them are asking for not a cancellation of the rent, but a deferment. So they will, in fact, pay the rent in the coming months. And there are various deals that we put in place that they can settle over the course of the year. I think the big question is I've mentioned already that we have collected 95.3% of our April rent roll, which is excellent, I think, compared to what the rest are doing. Yeah. Mm. Exactly. So maybe a percent off in May, but we don't think it'll be much more than that. And yeah, I think that pretty much sums it up. We don't know where this virus is going to go to, but I think you have to come down to the fundamentals: who's working and who's not working. Yeah. And as I said, Hope Labs, if you Google them on YouTube, you'll see they're all over the place, because they're one of the first movers with the testing, and they're in one building and moving into another building, but are enormously successful. And I think that is an indication of what's going on in our buildings. Absolutely. Well, I think, South Africans, and especially in these tough times, people are looking for a safe haven for solid, reliable returns. And I think, a lot of South African investors have exited out of the South African REIT sector, and, they're looking for those returns. So maybe I want to just talk a little bit about, the South African investors. What is the minimum investment that we need to invest with you guys, and maybe just tell us, you mentioned, I think it was a 5-year period to lock in terms of those returns, and you've explained those returns. So maybe just run through that process. Sure. So Neil, I think initially the idea was to do this for effectively Henny's mates, if I want to put it that way. The high net worth individuals. We were all looking for offshore investments, and I guess that's how we ultimately came together. But, we've realized that there is a massive amount of demand from South Africans that need to diversify and get some of their wealth offshore, and they don't know how to do it. So we have a platform that you can invest through, where you can invest as little as $5,000. So we brought that investment level down quite nicely. We don't think it's worth doing much less than that. It's not worth the hassle for the return. So yeah, very easy to invest $5,000. If you don't want to do it online, we actually have consultants that can help you, that can help you through the process. Excellent. So now, just the one question is the South African rand. I mean, we've had wild fluctuations. I mean, we've seen it go up and down, and obviously, as an emerging market currency. How's this impacted your business, certainly now and over the years? Yeah, I think investors throughout the world are a little punch drunk, Neil. But I think particularly our South African investors are nervous to move large amounts of money. There's a lot of new investors coming on board, testing with $10,000, $20,000. But we're not seeing the same sort of $100,000, $200,000 investments happening at the moment. Some people are waiting, hoping that the rand will recover. I know that certainly it's our view that you can't bet against the house. You have to have a long-term strategy of moving your assets, and you have to move on a regular basis. So that's the way that we're dealing with it. Interestingly, initially this thing was started by South Africans for South Africans, but most of our investment at the moment now comes from outside of South Africa. So we've got other emerging countries like China, Brazil, Australia, believe it or not, and Canada that are starting to come through quite strongly. So yeah, so we're not entirely dependent on the South Africans, but obviously we care a lot about our South African investors because of our roots.
Absolutely. Well, you make up your board. You've got Martin Freeman, he's a South African living in America. We've got Henny Besaidenout and yourself. You all sound like South African to me. You've got to look after your South African investors.
Indeed.
Yeah. Wonderful. Okay, so the platform, so if you want to go move forward, the platform is orbvest.com, and you mentioned that obviously you can either just click online with your investment or phone your consultant. So either way, if you like the old way of doing things, then you can just pick up the phone, or if you like the new way of doing things. And I know you don't position yourself as a tech company, you're an investment company. I just want you to clarify that.
No, totally. I mean, listen, my background is sort of in the tech sector. I love platforms, but the fact is that when you're investing, a couple million rand, you probably want to talk to someone. You want to sit down with someone, and so while we do have an online process, and you can certainly go part online, part offline, we encourage you to engage. And Neil, basically, I think that you guys have got a link at the bottom of the page, or actually on this interview.
Yes, we do. Yeah,
that would be super easy for people to catch somebody.
Wonderful. Justin Clarke, Chief Operating Officer of Orbvest.com. Thank you very much. It's wonderful chatting to you, and I'm sure we're going to be chatting to some of your colleagues in the future. We'd like to monitor and see how the investments progress. It seems that you guys are very transparent in terms of your investment. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And it was wonderful chatting to you.
Thanks again, Neil.
Thanks, Justin. All the best. Stay safe.